The morning started like every other one had on the ranch, with a sharp smell of coffee steaming up against the cool country air, the porch floor creaking gently beneath boots that had outlasted 3 pairs of spurs, and the sun crawling lazy over the horizon to light the fields in gold. My horses shifted in the paddock, tails swishing against early flies, the grass still heavy with dew. It was peace, or at least what peace was supposed to be. Then came the screech. Metal on gravel roared through the calm like a war horn, followed instantly by the unmistakable slam of impact that rattled my coffee mug against the rail and set the birds flying off the fence line. I didn't have to stand or lean over the porch to know exactly what had happened. By this point, I could tell the sound as surely as a man knows the voice of a bitter enemy. Karen Henderson had rammed her minivan directly into my ranch gate. Again. 7th time in less than 8 days. The gate wasn't just iron and hinges. It was my grandfather's handiwork, welded before Karen's subdivision ever dreamed itself into existence. It had been guarding this road longer than her lipstick and pearls had ever walked it. And yet, morning after morning, Karen flew down my drive like she was charging a castle wall, slamming bumper against bars, horn blaring as if the world owed her a crown she claimed as hers. This time there was more. Her head and arm jutted out of the driver's side window, clipboard raised like it was a sword of judgment, her mouth tossing my name into the air with the screech of banshees. Thin sheets of paper flailed in her grip, violation slips, ready to be thrown over the gate like mortars. She shouted the same line she always did. My gate was unapproved, my ranch was offensive to the community aesthetic, my right to exist required her stamped approval. The horn blared. Tires spun. The bumper and metal bars wrestled like bitter lovers refusing to part. I set the coffee down slow, because hands shaking with fury might meant to grip something harder. The path to the gate crunched under my boots as I walked, every step tight enough with restraint that the morning silence seemed to hum louder to make up for what my voice hadn't shouted yet. By the time I reached the fence, her horn was still screaming, her engine still fighting, her face an impossible shade of red to match the cheap lipstick she painted daily like war paint. "You'll regret this," she shrieked as I leaned against the fence post. "This gate is unlawful. It is a violation of HOA subsection." "Karen," I sighed, cutting through her screech like dry steel. "You know there's a brake pedal." "Right." Her jaw clenched so tight her whole head quivered. The hand with the clipboard whipped forward, flinging violation slips over the gate like confetti. They fanned through the cool air and flopped against the dirt and grass. I caught one mid-flight, tilted my head and read it. "Non-compliant driveway surface pattern," it declared boldly. Another was more inventive. "Improper fencing alignment inconsistent with community standards." I laughed. Out loud, deep, so sharp the air itself seemed to join me. I looked across the gate at her fuming eyes. "Karen, this is a ranch," I said, "not a strip mall parking lot." Her lips twisted, her face darkening even deeper, and with a desperate snarl she rammed the gate one last time for emphasis, the bumper groaning against steel before yanking the wheel hard. Gravel erupted in dust as her minivan peeled backward, retreating only so she could shout fresh threats. "You'll regret this. I'll bring fines that will crush you." She spun her car down the road, fishtailing out, but her shrieks still lingered in the air even after the dust tried to cover her tracks. I bent down, gathered the paper slips, stacked them neat in my hand. They rattled, weak creatures even a breeze could shred. By noon, I was wiping sweat from my forehead, hammering dents out of what had once been a straight, proud gate, when I heard another engine. But this time it wasn't Karen, it was the sheriff's cruiser crunching slow up my drive. He stepped out, cigarette smell clinging to his jacket before his words did. "Illegal fencing complaint," he muttered grimly, reading from the paper before snorting. "From the Henderson woman." I leaned the hammer against the post and shook my head. "You've been here as long as me," the sheriff sighed. His eyes moved from the battered gate to me, then back again. "That thing's been standing here longer than half the county's roads. Hell, I grew up driving past it. If that's illegal, then the moon's liable for trespassing the sky." His tone wasn't mocking, wasn't sharp. Just tired. Tired of being pulled into theatrics no badge should waste fuel on. He stuffed the paper back into his folder and muttered while turning, "That woman needs a hobby." Then he drove off, leaving my yard quiet again, except for the low groan of bent metal. The peace in his leaving did nothing to soothe me. The irritation burned deeper, hotter. This wasn't about gates. Not fences. Not driveway patterns. Every morning it became clearer. Karen wasn't fighting for rules. She was fighting for control. For the thrill of controlling others while pretending it was justice. She had picked my ranch as her fiefdom project. Proof that her uniform kingdom of cul-de-sacs reached further than maps claimed. That evening I patched dents with sore arms. The sun's edge spread blood orange across the horizon. Bill, my neighbor with a mouthful of trouble and a weary ATV, pulled up just as nails hit post. He watched with amusement as the hammer struck again and again. One day, Bill chuckled, voice carried on the buzz of crickets. "You're going to snap." I stopped on that last swing, sweat clinging to my brow, muscles stiff under dirt-crusted shirt, eyes fixed long on the horizon. "Bill," I muttered, "one day isn't far off." And as the last shadows pulled over the ranch that night, as the smell of worked iron lingered with the dust of my sweat, the realization settled heavy in my chest. Karen had turned my home into a battlefield. And the war had just begun. The morning after Karen's latest tantrum was eerily calm, the kind of quiet that makes you wonder if nature itself is holding its breath. The pasture rippled in soft gray mist, horses snorting faint plumes of warmth into the cold dawn. My gate limped against the breeze, its dented bones creaking as though it wanted mercy. Coffee steamed bitter and black beside me, but I barely tasted it. I was staring past everything, into a decision I'd already made. The last day's chaos, Karen's minivan snarling against the metal bars, papers fluttering like poisoned snow, her screeches about bylaws invented in her reflection. It all spun through me like a wheel that had finally ground down to a single truth. I was finished playing defense. By noon, the tow truck had hauled away what was left of her minivan, leaving oil scars across my gravel. She wasn't there to watch it go. No, she was probably marching through cul-de-sacs, spinning stories about how my violent gait had attacked her, how I'd engineered some trap for her poor innocent bumper. She thrived on twisting fiction louder than anyone else could tell truth. Bill had wandered by again, ATV growling low as he leaned sideways with that smirk of his. "You're plotting something," he said knowingly. "I can see it brewing behind your eyes. Just promise me, whatever it is, it's legendary." He wasn't wrong. That night, under the dim glow of a lantern, I sat at my table sketching lines across an old notebook. Not straight doors or repairs, but something heavier. Stronger. Something timeless. Not another hinge or latch that could buckle against her insanity. What I imagined was older than steel. More patient than any man. A boulder. On the backside of the ranch, up past the ridge where thickets claw harder than thorns and even deer don't wander, lay a scatter of giants. Rocks deposited by centuries of storms and glaciers, stone slabs that had never moved, had never bent, had never broken under the weight of time. They sat like silent sentinels, older than laws, older than Karen, older than the notion that land could be ruled by clipboards and lipstick. If I could pull one of those beasts down, drag it screaming across dirt until it sat by my gate, I would have my answer. Not a gate she could dent. Not a post she could rattle. But a truth she couldn't defy. A wall of earth. It was crazy. Dangerous. Borderline absurd. But as I pressed my hand against the battered grain of my gate that evening, I knew no piece of paper fine could match granite that had waited 1,000 years. The next dawn found me on the tractor. Chains piled heavy at my boots. Exhaust belched clouds that hung in the morning chill as I wound my way up to the hillside. Birds wheeled high above as though curious what madness dragged such noise where only silence had lived. When I reached the stony outcrop, I killed the engine, breathed deep, and stared at the chosen one. It was massive, mottled gray streaked with veins like scars. Nearly the size of the gate itself, its back half buried in dirt so packed it looked permanent. Which was exactly the point. I climbed down, ran my hand across its cold skin, and smiled. "Karen," I murmured to the wind, "let's see you argue with this." The chains clinked around my shoulders like armor. I wrapped them tight, teeth biting grooves into stone grooves until my palms burned. The tractor groaned as I throttled forward. At first, the rock didn't move. It laughed at me with silence, daring me to keep trying. My arms shook on the wheel, tires spun, dirt spit, and slowly, so slowly I thought maybe I was imagining it, the boulder lurched. Just an inch. Just a crack of surrender. I shouted against the engine as sweat soaked through my shirt, coaxing power from gears that squealed like animals in pain. The chains trembled but held, the boulder inching forward, scraping its judgment deep into the earth. Every few feet, I'd stop, retighten, roar again. Hours blurred into a haze of effort. My muscles screamed, my lungs burned, but still I dragged. By afternoon, the beast of stone had left a scarred trail all the way from ridge to drive. When it finally rested at the side of the road, looming in the shadow of my battered gate, I killed the tractor with a cough of smoke and dropped against the dirt. My chest heaved. My hands blistered raw. But my grin wouldn't quit. There it was. My partner. My answer. An immovable soldier waiting for its war. I spent the rest of the daylight rigging the mechanism. Rusty pulleys, repurposed chains, anchor beams dug steady into dirt. With enough force, enough leverage, the boulder could be swung into place behind the gate. Not casually. Not quickly. But whenever I needed, it would stand guard. When Bill came loping back that evening with a cold beer in hand, his jaw nearly unhinged. He stared at the beast sitting smug against my driveway, still crusted with earth from its journey. Good Lord. You're serious. I just nodded, tightening a chain link against the post. She's going to lose her mind, he muttered, laughter spilling through the words. She's going to lose more than that. I didn't reply. Because this wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. That night, as coyotes yipped from somewhere in the timber and stars pricked sharp against the dark, I stood with one hand on the stone. Its surface radiated cold beneath my palm, but what I felt inside was warmer than it had been in months. For the first time since Karen had turned my mornings into battlegrounds, I wasn't dreading the next sunrise. I was anticipating it. I imagined it clear, her headlights barreling down my drive, horn shrieking, paper slips flying. Only this time, she wouldn't slam into steel and hinges. She'd meet Earth itself. Geology doesn't bow to bylaws. And finally, neither would I. The sky was painted silver with dawn mist, the kind of morning where breath turns white in the air and dew sharpens the grass into crystal points. My coffee was as black as midnight, steam curling lazy as it climbed into the chill. The ranch was quiet except for the snort of horses stomping hooves impatiently in the paddock. Quiet, yes, but beneath that calm was something alive. Anticipation, coiled tight in my chest like a spring ready to snap. I hadn't slept the night before. Most of the hours had been spent testing the chains, tightening bolts, making sure the pulley rig hummed smooth. Each clink of steel against stone was its own kind of hymn, a preparation for the inevitable storm tearing its way toward me. Karen had made a ritual of it. Screeching tires at sunrise, rants pitched high enough for the cattle to turn their heads, horns blaring like brass in an uninvited parade. I was sure she'd come. And right on cue, the low growl of an old truck engine rolled over the hill. Not her usual minivan. I'd already seen that carcass hauled away on a tow. This was her husband's battered pickup. The beast sounded like war on wheels, loud and ugly, its engine hacking with rust but still persuasive enough to chew up my dirt road like it was born a predator. Dust frothed in the air as it barreled down the drive. Headlights cut flat through the mist. At the wheel sat the HOA queen herself, back straighter than a rifle barrel, mouth contorted into that familiar grimace of someone convinced righteousness could be measured in volume. Even from the porch I could see her white knuckling the steering wheel, lips already shouting words I didn't need to hear to recognize. She wasn't slowing. If anything, she gunned the accelerator harder when the battered gate came into view, bent from battles past but still standing. She thought today would be the same old show. Crash, scream, papers flung like grenades. Her little pageant of intimidation. Only today the stage was different. Behind the warped bars and creaking hinges, the boulder waited. I'd chained it into position like an executioner's block, silent and immovable, shadowed in morning haze. Its weight pressed into the dirt as though the earth itself wanted to hold it steady. My hand tightened around the lever. My jaw clenched. I waited until she was almost on me, horn flashing twice like a trumpet signaling her own arrival. And then, with a sound like iron crying, I pulled. The chain screamed, the pulley wailed, and with a grinding thunder the boulder shifted. Down came weight older than her subdivision, older than her bylaws. It rolled true into the slot I'd prepared, settling with finality right behind the gate, a granite beast crouched to defend. Her eyes, barely visible through the truck's dusty windshield, widened. She hit the brakes. But Karen Henderson had never understood limits, never respected timing. And this time, timing was cruel. The squeal of rubber splitting against gravel tore through the valley. The truck skidded, dust erupting high as smoke, but forward momentum didn't care about bylaws or clipboards. Metal screamed as bumper slammed into granite. The entire front end of the pickup crumpled like a tin can under a boot heel. Steam erupted from the hinges of the hood, hissing white into the morning air. For a moment, silence. Perfect, golden silence. Only the soft ticking of a ruined engine filling what used to be chaos. I leaned against the fence post, mug in hand, and took a slow sip. The coffee burned hot against my tongue, a warmth that paired sweet with the ice-cold satisfaction sparking alive inside me. Through the shattered windshield, Karen's face was a portrait worth painting. Shock plastered wide, fury clamped right behind it, disbelief rattling through her bones at the knowledge that she had finally met something that did not move for her. She clawed open the driver door and stumbled out, clipboard clutched like a shield, her hair falling out of its hairspray fortress, lipstick smeared like blood on her teeth. She staggered across the gravel, pointing a trembling finger at the stone. "You maniac!" she shrieked, her voice cracking against the mist. "You can't put a rock there. It's murder. Attempted murder." I let the words hang, their absurdity echoing in the air. Then I drank my coffee again, slower this time. "Funny," I said finally, tone dry as the winter wind. "I call it landscaping. HOA's been begging me for curb appeal, right? Well, there it is. Meet the centerpiece." A sudden burst of laughter cracked behind us. Bill had shown up right on schedule, ATV buzzing low as he parked just up the trail. His grin split high and wide, eyes gleaming like a kid front row at the circus. "Lord above," Bill muttered, hands bracing against his knees as he wheezed out the laugh. "This is better than television." Karen spun on him like a cornered snake, clipboard shaking violently. "You think this is funny? You think conspiring against community safety is?" Bill tipped his hat low and smirked. "Lady, if you keep driving into things, it's not our safety that's the problem. It's your aim." Her scream could have peeled paint off the gate if there'd been any left. She stomped in circles, kicking dust, waving papers, demanding fines, swearing lawsuits high enough to reach the Supreme Court. Each sentence more ridiculous than the last, fueled by a desperation that only the humiliated feel in their marrow. And then the sheriff's truck rolled up. The same friend I'd seen before, only this time he parked harder, gravel crunching heavy under tires. He climbed out slow, hat pulled low on his brow, looked at the wrecked pickup still kissing granite, looked at Karen hyperventilating in dust, then looked at me sipping coffee like it was Sunday service. He rubbed his temples, muttering what had to be a prayer against nonsense before asking, resigned and weary, "All right. What's the complaint this time?" Karen jumped into a rant without pause, voice raised so high it cracked. "Sheriff, this is attempted vehicular homicide. He set a trap. He's weaponized geology against me." The sheriff blinked, stared at her for a long, quiet beat, then turned toward me with eyes struggling, almost failing to hold back a grin. His voice measured slow. "So let me get this straight. You rolled a rock onto your land. She drove into it." I simply nodded. He huffed, fighting the smile like a man trying not to laugh at a funeral. Then, facing Karen, his lips twitched and surrendered. "Ma'am, last I checked rocks don't jump in front of trucks. Maybe you've got yourself a driving problem." Bill howled, laughter cutting across the field, his ATV seat creaking under how hard it shook. Even my horses kicked their hooves in restless agreement. Karen nearly combusted on the spot. Her shriek was pure wildfire. Threats spat between ragged breaths. HOA lawsuits. County petitions. Fine so big I'd lose the inheritance of my cattle feed. She screamed her rage until her lungs had nothing left, then screamed again, her voice raw like a singer who didn't know when the song had ended. The sheriff finally shook his head, exhaled long, and told her plain. Enough. If you drive into steel, you're at fault. If you drive into stone, you're at fault. And if you keep dialing 911 for theatrics, I'll file harassment myself. Go home, Karen, before you succeed in blaming the grass for being green. Her mouth snapped open, shut, then open again, words sputtering like steam from her crippled engine. At last, she spun sharp, storming toward the battered pickup, only to realize the front axles were bent so deep the tires pointed opposite ways. She stomped harder, stormed down the drive on foot, cursing the dust itself, shrieking that this was not over. I just raised my mug to her dwindling figure. A toast of bitter coffee and quiet triumph. Bill pulled up beside me, shaking his head, freckles glowing red from laughter. You've done it now, he said, smirking wide. I didn't start this, I said calmly. I just finished the chapter. Behind us, the Boulder sat silent, its massive shadow looming patient over the gate. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like my land was fragile. I felt it armored, not just in chains and stone, but in resolve. The war with Karen wasn't over. But this battle. For the first time, it was mine. The ranch woke in silence the morning after Karen's truck kissed the boulder, a silence too neat and too still, like a chessboard waiting for its next move. For 3 days that quiet lingered, broken only by the creak of my old gate and the restless stomps of horses in their stalls. I patched fences, hauled hay, drank coffee on my porch, and watched dawn smear itself over the fields without interruption. And yet, each hour pressed heavy against me, because I knew Karen Henderson wasn't finished. She wasn't the kind who learned lessons. She was the kind who doubled down. The 4th morning, my suspicions birthed proof. Bill rumbled up the drive, ATV spitting dust in its trail, a grin plastered wide across his face, though his eyes burned with the kind of disbelief only Karen could provoke. He slapped a piece of paper into my hand, some ink-smudged flyer he'd fished out of his mailbox. Emergency HOA meeting. The headline screamed in chunky block letters. Underneath, bold words condemned me as a dangerous element threatening community safety. Beneath that, a list, each fabricated more ridiculous than the last. Illegal fortified gate. Reckless placement of deadly boulders. Non-compliant livestock. Psychological warfare tactics causing emotional trauma to HOA leadership. Bill wheezed laughter, smacking his knee. She's calling you a terrorist, pal. A terrorist with cows. I wrinkled the paper in my fist, jaw clenching. Anger rose hot but steadied into something colder, sharper, like steel against whetstone. If she wants a war in front of the whole neighborhood, I muttered, then they're going to hear my side this time. With proof. By sundown, Karen had painted herself queen of the airwaves. Every mailbox in the valley stuffed with copies of her flyer. By morning, a local paper drifted on my porch, its neighborhood section splashed with a photo of her pointing furiously at my gate. The headline screamed, HOA President Battles Dangerous Ranch Hazards. The article beneath fed on her performance, making me out as a deranged landowner who armed his property with geological weapons. I sat on my porch with the folded paper, coffee bitter on my tongue, fury clouding my ribs, until finally I laughed loud enough to scare the horses. Because exaggeration was never Karen's endgame. Lies for her were scaffolding, a temporary skeleton she used until she built something sharper. My prediction landed hours later when a black SUV hissed down my gravel road like a shark swimming too far inland. Out stepped a man in a tailored suit, hair slicked with expensive gel, clipboard underarm as he adjusted his cufflinks at my gate. His smile was small, sharp, and smug. Charles Donovan, he introduced himself like he was unveiling a monument. Legal counsel for the Henderson HOA. I'm here to perform a preliminary inspection of these alleged safety hazards. I chuckled, actually laughed in his face, leaned against the fence post, arms crossed. Son, I said, this land isn't under HOA jurisdiction. It never has been. You step one toe beyond this gate, you're trespassing, legal counsel or not. He smirked like men smirk when they've been handed one too many billable hours. He didn't step onto my property, but he strutted along the fence line snapping photos with his phone. The boulder, the gate, even my horses chewing hay became evidence. When he'd snapped enough, he straightened and gave the line I half expected to hear in Karen's own voice. Legal repercussions are inevitable if you don't comply with HOA mandates. Save yourself trouble. Tear down the gate. Remove the obstruction. Tell your boss, I replied calmly, that geology isn't going anywhere. He left, tires chewing painfully slow ruts into my gravel, but the mutter under his breath was enough to tell me Karen had escalated her game from pamphlets to legal warfare. That night, clouds stitched themselves black across the ridge, thunder muttering in the distance like a crowd waiting for spectacle. The first flashes of lightning danced silver across my fences, and it was in that strobe that I noticed headlights creeping down my drive. Not Karen this time. Two of her clipboard cronies piled out of a borrowed pickup, tools jangling sheepishly in their hands as if destruction could be disguised as compliance work. They fiddled at my fence, undoing bolts, yanking chains, muttering fast like thieves rushing before dawn broke their cover. I stayed in the shadows of my porch, camera in hand. Each lightning flash gave me enough light to capture every guilty expression, every crowbar glint. Snap. Snap. The camera fired, evidence stacking inside its belly. When the flash finally caught their eyes, panic etched across their faces. They bolted, scrambling back into the truck like frightened raccoons caught in garbage cans. Tires spat mud, engine howled away, but not before I had what I needed. By morning, those photos were in the sheriff's hands. He tapped the stack with a tired sigh that carried the weight of exhaustion only years of watching Karen could carve in a man. That woman's lost every last marble, he muttered. We'll file warnings and document this. But brace yourself. She won't stop. And this time, it's looking criminal. I left the office not soothed but braced, like a soldier adjusting his armor after hearing how deep the enemy's line now stretched. Back at the ranch, I bolstered my defenses. More chains, tighter locks, and cameras at every angle. Not because I doubted she'd return, but because I knew she was circling faster, like a hawk missing one meal too many. Bill came by again, tossing me a rumor between swigs of soda. She started calling it a safety patrol, getting her loyal lapdogs to drive loops around your property like they're deputized. Says she's monitoring a dangerous element. I laughed dark, bitter. She thinks this is her movie. The problem for her is, she's not the director anymore. Because I had shifted my role now, too. I wasn't the reluctant rancher pinned behind a gate with only anger. I was the archivist of every crime she committed. I documented. I logged. Each violation, each flyer, each absurd claim filed on false scripture of bylaws. Every day her empire shrank by the weight of her own actions, and every day my file grew fatter with the truth. Karen mistook noise for power. But truth, quiet and patient, builds taller walls. So when another knock landed, not at my door but at neighbors', when another flyer stuffed lies into their mailboxes, this time they didn't swallow it whole. Some even slipped copies under my door, shaking their heads at her delusions. The propaganda war had started. But unlike Karen, I wasn't fighting it in noise. I was fighting it in ink, in photos, in steady determination. And with each flash of the camera, each page in my file, I felt the war shifting. It wasn't just my gate she wanted anymore. It was my dignity, my peace, my land. And in her obsession, she had given me the strongest weapon a man could hold. Evidence. The stone by my gate stood silent as always, morning sun rising against its unyielding bulk. But inside me, another stone took shape, one carved of stubborn truth. And I knew, next time Karen tried to bring war, she wasn't going to shout it into existence. She was going to walk headfirst into her own downfall, drawn line by line in the very evidence she gave me herself. The morning broke soft and golden, the kind of light that normally painted the fields calm and innocent. But that day the sunlight felt more like a spotlight, laying bare every inch of dust and grass across the ranch as though nature itself was preparing for a stage play. My gut twisted tight with instinct. This wasn't just another morning. This was the morning. The storm Karen Henderson had been brewing was coming, and the valley could feel it. I sat on the porch with my usual coffee, but I didn't sip it easy. My folders sat stacked on the table beside me, fat with evidence. Photographs of clipped fences, screenshots of lies, statements from neighbors too exhausted to stay silent, even Cheryl's leaks of the rewritten bylaws highlighted in her neat librarian script. My weapon wasn't noise. It wasn't iron, and it wasn't even the Boulder crouched silent and indomitable by my gate. My weapon was proof, layered into paper and ink, undeniable in the clear light of day. It began with the sound of engines. Not one, not two, but several. Too many for a morning call. The hum built into a roar until dust plumes snaked across the horizon. It wasn't Karen's battered SUV this time. Not even just a few nervous minions with clipboards. No, this was a caravan. SUVs polished and black gleamed under the sunlight. A county code enforcement truck with its little flag fluttering. And strangest of all, a local television van rattled at the end. Satellite dish raised high like a prow. She had called in an audience. They rolled to a halt across my drive, blocking the road with headlights glaring like police flashers. When the engines died, the silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Karen emerged first. She didn't stumble or rush. She strutted, her face pulled into a smile sharpened too tight at the edges, her outfit a new blazer that cut the sunlight in harsh angles, her hair sprayed into helmet perfection, her lipstick drawn brighter than blood. In her hand was a thick leather folder, stuffed so full it barely closed. She lifted it high as if Holy Scripture itself was clenched between her fingers. Behind her poured her soldiers, Curtis clutching yardsticks like a weaponized ruler, a few of her loudest loyalists holding clipboards, and two unfamiliar men in black windbreakers, their stance stiff as private security. Then came the cameramen, adjusting their focus, hungry eyes darting for spectacle. I didn't move. Didn't shout. I rose slow, gathering my evidence with deliberate care, and walked down toward the gate until I stood behind it, wood and wire between myself and the woman who'd made my ranch her obsession. Karen slammed her folder against the bars. The sound cracked across the valley like a gunshot. The cameraman zoomed in, ready to drink every ounce of performance. "This," she bellowed, voice riding the morning air sharp and proud, "is the end of your charade. These are emergency court orders demanding immediate removal of unlawful hazards from this property. Your fortified gate and your boulder trap. You are in direct violation of HOA mandates, county ordinances, and community safety standards. You will tear them down now, or I will have them torn down with this authority." She tapped the folder like it was a sword, her chest rising with that smug surety she thought had never failed her. Every move, every glance was for the cameras. She wanted me framed as the outlaw, the menace in jeans and boots, deluded in my isolation while the community stood righteous and urbane. I let her speech settle. Let the silence ride longer than she liked. And then, calm as prayer, I reached into my box. My folder wasn't leather. It wasn't theatrical. Just battered cardboard swollen with paper. I lifted it high so the cameras swung my way. "This," I said, my tone not raised yet each word distinct, "is the truth." I laid out photographs one at a time, pinning them against the gate wire for everyone to see. Lightning-bright photos of her cronies hacking at my fence in the storm. Photos of tire ruts her minivan left after embedding itself in my grandfather's iron. Photos of her crumpled truck steaming against a movable stone. Then I raised Cheryl's emails, printed crisp, highlighted passages proving she rewrote bylaws behind closed doors, threatening her own board. Statements signed by neighbors tired of ticket slips for mailbox colors and barn paint. The murmurs rolled through the crowd like a wave. Voices muttered, heads turned, brows furrowed. Karen's smile stiffened, her eyes darting too wild. She cut in, shrieking sharp enough to pierce the moment. "Fabricated. All of it. He's misleading. These are lies." Before she could scream herself into control, gravel spit from behind as another truck barreled into sight. A dust cloud crowned its arrival, and when it cleared, the sheriff's vehicle stood there like a gavel carved in steel. The door opened. Out he stepped, hat shading his eyes, a paper in his hand. His boots crunched against dirt with each slow stride forward. Karen turned almost gleeful, certain she still had a friend to salvage her show. Instead, the sheriff's voice rang heavy and clear. Karen Henderson. This office has received repeated complaints and submitted evidence showing harassment, false reporting, destruction of private property, and misuse of emergency services. Effective this morning, a temporary restraining order has been issued. You are barred from coming within 500 feet of this ranch. The words landed like a hammer against stone. Silence cracked into the crowd. Karen's face went slack, lips trembling, then twisted into rage. Outrage, she screamed. This is bias. Corruption. The HOA is above, you can't. The sheriff's glare silenced her like a slam of cell doors. No one, he said slow, is above the law. Not you. Not your HOA. The cameras drank it all. Karen spinning with fury, red lipstick streaking her teeth, hands clutching her folder of empty threats like a drowning woman clinging to driftwood. The neighbors who had gathered along the roadside no longer whispered nervously. They laughed. They pointed. Some clapped, the sound cutting colder into her carefully built stage than any boo could have. Even her loyalists shifted awkward, glancing at one another as if suddenly ashamed they'd played repeats in her courtroom of farce. Her hired guards looked at the sheriff's hand hovering near his cuffs and wisely stepped back. The cameraman caught every nail splintering in her mask as she shrieked and stomped, but even she seemed to know it was over. She stormed back toward her SUV in a flurry of curses that the microphones happily caught anyway. Slammed the door so hard the windshield quivered. Peeled out in a geyser of dust, the caravan losing shape as neighbors jeered from the roadside. And just like that, the queen had abdicated. The crowd buzzed. Applause broke out, genuine this time, from neighbors who had stayed small for too long. Phones recorded, voices rose hopeful, stories passed like sparks about her reign crumbling right before their eyes. The sheriff handed me the copy of the restraining order. His eyes were tired, but when they met mine there was a flicker of satisfaction. It's over, he said simply. For the first time in months, my chest lightened. That evening, as the sun bled red and orange across the fields, Bill sat beside me on the porch rail, both of us silent as we stared at the Boulder standing calm by the gate. He cracked a beer, handed me one, and finally muttered with a smirk, "Think she'll try again?" I watched the long quiet road, the field stretching free, the gate unbroken, the silence honest this time. Maybe in her head, I said softly. But no, not anymore. We clinked bottles, the sound sharp and final like an exhale you didn't know you'd been holding. The crickets sang, the ranch breathed easy, and for the first time in a long stretch of ugly mornings, peace wasn't fragile. It was solid, like the boulder planted deep in the earth. Karen Henderson's war was over, and the ranch had won.